In this video, you're going to learn 5 things that I wish I knew before I became a worship leader. Coming up. Hey, Spencer here from leadingworshipwell.com. This is the place where we talk about how to lead yourself well, lead your church well, and lead worship well. So if you're interested in that, make sure to subscribe below so you don't miss out on future worship leading tip videos just like this one. But let's get into it because today we're talking about 5 things that I wish I knew before I became a worship leader. And I started leading worship 14 years ago. I was 13 whenever I started leading worship. And there are some things that I wish that I knew before I started leading worship, because it would have made these past 14 years a lot easier. Not necessarily skills that I wish that I knew, because I think that you pick those up along the way, but just general things, general perspectives in worship leading that I wish I knew and that I had, because it would have made some things that I've gone through in these 14 years of worship leading a lot easier. So I'm going to be sharing those with you today. But before we get there, I want to hear from you. What do you wish that you knew before you became a worship leader? What was something that you've learned over your years, or maybe it's only been a few months of worship leading, that you're like, man, I wish that I knew that before I started worship leading, because it would have made what I'm doing now so much easier. Let me know below, what do you wish you knew before you became a worship leader? I'll talk to you in a second. Thanks so much for sharing your answer down below. Make sure to read those. We got some smart people in the Leading Worship Well community. Let's get into it though. 5 things that I wish I knew before I became a worship leader. The first thing is this. Leading worship is 10% about leading music and 90% about leading people. Leading worship is 10% leading music, 90% leading people. And I think that we get this backwards, especially whenever we start leading worship. I know that I did. We get into worship leading. Maybe some of us have a really pure heart and we're like, I just want to lead people in worship. But I know for a lot of us, especially if we get into it at a young age, maybe we aren't mature in our faith yet, our reason for leading worship is I play guitar, or I sing, or I play bass, or whatever, and I just like playing music, and this seems like a good avenue to play music. And it seems like that's what a lot of leading worship is. You know, I just see people up there on stage, they're playing music, looks fun, I'm going to join, I'm going to become a worship leader. And so you go in with that mindset, and maybe that carries over into your first worship leading position, whether that's paid or if it's volunteer, and you think, okay, I am now officially the worship leader at my church. Surely that must mean that my responsibilities include sitting down and writing songs. That would be really awesome if that was all I got to do all day. Or maybe it's I'm going to just be running through worship songs all week, and it's going to be really fun because I'm going to get to sit down and work on new arrangements. And maybe it's, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to get to practice my instrument all day, right? And then also on the side here, you know, I've got this team that I'm going to lead, and I've got my church to lead on Sunday. But that's not how it works at all. No, it's the opposite. You know, the more that I lead worship, the more I understand that it's about leading people. And the music is just a sort of a tool in order to lead people in worship. It's just the means by which we're leading people, but it is not the means of everything that we're doing. The people don't exist to serve the music. The music exists to serve and meet the needs of the people and allow them to worship. And so we need to focus more on the people than we need to focus on the music side of things. And so what that means is understanding, okay, I am the worship leader in my church. That doesn't mean that I sit down and play my instrument and sing all day. What that actually means is I'm scheduling volunteers. I'm pouring into my worship team and helping them grow, yes, musically, but also spiritually, also in their own worship leading, so that I'm not just the one leading worship all the time. If it was about music, then I'd be like, man, I love music. I want to play music all the time, so I'm just going to lead every song. But when it becomes about people, it's not, I'm going to do everything. It's, I'm going to train, I'm going to equip the saints for the work of ministry and raise up other leaders in the church, because it's not about the music, it's about equipping people to do the works of ministry. And so, yeah, 10% music, 90% leading people. Be prepared for that, especially if you step into an official worship leading position. Like I said, whether that's volunteer or paid, it's going to be more about leading people. So work on your people management skills, your leading skills, more than you work on your music skills. Those music skills, that's the easy stuff. Anybody can figure that out. But leading people, that's the difficult part, and that's 90% of our job as worship leaders. So I wish that I knew that before I became a worship leader. The second thing that I wish I knew before I became a worship leader is that there are 52 Sundays in a year. And maybe you're like, well, I already know that, but I didn't understand what that meant for my worship ministry. And really what I wish I knew is that leading worship isn't a singular event. And I think so often we come at it from that view as worship leaders. I know I did all the time, especially when I was first starting out. I was like, this is the first time that I'm leading worship in front of my church, and I've got to have everything perfect. I've got to have it all planned out. There's no room for mistakes. There's no room for anything. The bar is set up here, and I need to reach that bar, or else I failed at my worship leading. But that's not how it is. Leading worship is not a singular event. And especially if you're new at this, just understand that you have so much opportunity to grow. And there are so many environments for you to grow. You know, you've got Sunday mornings, maybe you've got like Wednesday nights at your church, maybe you do worship them. Maybe you've got small groups at your church and you lead in a small group. Maybe you've got like nights of worship. So there's probably at least like 60 opportunities in a given year for you to lead worship. And that's not just to lead worship, but that's to improve in your worship leading. So when I was starting out, I wish I knew that, Spencer, you don't have to get everything right in this moment right now. You're going to be leading worship for 14 more years at least. And that is, give me a second, I just did the math, that's 728 Sundays that I've essentially led worship for. I'm sure I had some vacations in there, but let's call it 700 Sundays that I've led worship, not to mention the countless other times that I've led worship. I want you to lead with that perspective for yourself. This isn't a singular event. Yes, it's cool to have like a really special night of worship and do something amazing. Those are always fun, but this isn't a singular event. You know, it doesn't happen once. And not only does it not happen once here on earth, but we're going to be worshiping forever. So don't judge yourself too soon. We have an eternity to worship and improve our worship leading. I'm not sure what that looks like when we get to heaven, but I don't know. Maybe we'll be leading worship in heaven. Maybe we won't need anyone to lead us in worship in heaven because God will just be right there. I don't know. That's a tangent. We'll see what happens. But right now, you got tons and tons of time to improve your worship leading. So if you don't have everything figured out right now, it's going to be okay. The third thing that I wish I knew before I became a worship leader is that you can do more with a team than you can by yourself. It's, like I said, back in number one, leading worship is actually 90% leading people, and part of that includes leading a team. But whenever we get that backwards, and we make it 90% about music, we think, well, I can just do this all by myself because it's just the musical piece, and we can handle the musical piece by ourselves, but we can't handle the leading the people of our church by ourselves. So we need to build a team around us. And this was something that I didn't get right for probably the first 10 years of my worship ministry. And I'm still trying to figure it out right now because, as you know, it's just easier to do things by yourself sometimes. Once you include other people, things become a lot more complicated. But in the end, it's worth it because you can do more with a team than you can by yourself. A group of 10 people are going to be able to do more than just me by myself. First of all, I might actually get a Sunday off every once in a while because there's going to be other leaders in my church, and then I'm rested. And once I'm rested, I'll be able to lead better whenever I am actually leading because I'll be rested and I'll be ready to go and I'll be refreshed and I won't be burnt out. So that's one angle. Also, think about all the people in your church. Maybe you lead in a church of like 100 people. That would be what some people would consider a small church. When I say small church, I think of 200 and under. I understand that there's a lot of balance or a lot of play in the joints there, where there's like some of you lead in churches of 20, some of you lead in churches of 50. When I say small churches, I'm talking about 200 and under. But if you lead in a church, in a small church, quote unquote, whatever that means for you, you probably can't get to know 100 individual people. Like in the way that you need to get to know them to actually understand what they need out of worship. But think about it. If you have a team of 10 people and those 10 people get to know 10 people in your church, that's 100 people right there. 10 times 10 is 100. And so instead of you having to get to know 100 people by yourself as the worship leader, which you should try to do, but I just don't think it's possible to have deep relationships with 100 different people in your church, but you can have a deep relationship with 10 people in your church, and you multiply that over a 10-person team, and now you know everybody in your church. And like I talked about in last week's video, you get to know the context that you're leading in. And that doesn't mean that you personally know everything about everybody in your church, but somebody on your team knows something about that person that you're thinking about. So do you see how the math works out there? You can always accomplish more with a team than you can by yourself. So I wish I knew that. Start working on that now if that's you. Try to break that pride. Try to break that feeling of it's just easier if I do it by myself. Yes, it's easier in the short run, but in the long run, you aren't going to accomplish as much. The fourth thing I wish I knew before becoming a worship leader is that you will learn more from doing than you will from studying. And maybe this is just an Enneagram 5 thing, which is what I am. And if you're watching this video, you are studying, quote unquote, worship, because you probably subscribe to other worship leading channels, not just me. You probably are part of a worship leading Facebook group, maybe you read worship leading blogs. And it becomes so easy to just consume all of this information, and we've just got it inside of us. And it's like, well, someday when that specific thing happens, I will know how to deal with it. And we spend all our time consuming and consuming and consuming, but we never actually do what we've learned. In my videos, I try to offer a lot of practical tips and like things that you can do. And so whether that's like creating a set list, or maybe it's about what to say between worship songs, and I challenge you in this video right here to like answer these questions to figure out what you want to say to your church. We can just take that and we can internalize it and study it, or we can actually do it and say, okay, I'm going to sit down, and Spencer said this is what I need to do to actually formulate what I'm going to say whenever I speak to my church. So I'm going to write down those 4 questions and I'm going to answer them for this Sunday, and then I'm going to use that on Sunday. You will always learn more from doing than you will from studying. So take that to heart. Start doing more than you study. Be a creator instead of a consumer. Consume what little you need, and then use that to create a worshipful environment for your church and improve your worship leading. Don't get stuck in the studying, get to doing. Finally, number 5, the 5th thing I wish I knew before becoming a worship leader is your church needs you. Your church needs you. And I talked about that in last week's video, but I just thought it bared repeating. Your church doesn't need your idea of what you think a worship leader should be. As worship leaders, especially with like the I don't know how to describe it, but like the worship music industry, but really it's grown beyond that. I feel like where like we have unprecedented access into viewing what's going on in other churches around the world, especially because of the pandemic and everybody's live streaming now. And so it's so easy for us to hop on social media and see the live stream of another church, and we see how another worship leader in another church acts, and we're like, that they seem pretty cool. I wish I could be like that. And so you end up trying to imitate other worship leaders. And I know I did this as I started worship leading, is like I saw another worship leader and I was like, that must be what a worship leader is. And so you try to take on those different qualities. And yes, there's something to be said for like having a role model and looking up to people and like trying to lead in the way that they do, but understand that your church is unique. You lead in a specific context, and your church doesn't need someone from Bethel to lead them. They don't need someone from Hillsong to lead them. They don't need Paul Baloche to lead them, although that would be awesome to have any of those worship leaders lead them. But no one in the current moment right now knows your church like you know your church. And that means that you have a unique advantage in how you lead them because you actually know the people in your church. So don't try to be like somebody else whenever you're leading worship. Just be yourself. If you're awkward and clumsy, be awkward and clumsy. You know, it's always weird for me when I see somebody leading worship on stage and then I know them outside of that time, and they're like a completely different person outside of that time than they are on stage. Not even in like a bad way. I'm not saying like somebody who doesn't live their life in a way that upholds Christian values or anything. I'm just saying like we take on this worship leading persona sometimes, and we don't need to do that. We can just be ourselves. You know, when I'm on stage in front of my church, I talk like this, because this is how I talk in real life. I don't get some worship leader voice in a hushed tone and start talking like this. At least I don't think I do. But you can do that too. I know that I used to do that though whenever I started leading worship, is I thought I needed to fulfill this picture of what another worship leader had set for me, or I thought I needed to fulfill this picture of what a worship leader was, whatever that meant. And so I started to just not be myself. But I wish that I knew that it's okay to just be myself. If you're young and you're 16 and you feel awkward, be that on stage. It's going to be okay. People know who you are. You're not tricking anyone. It's not like you can fake who you are whenever you're up on stage. People know who you are, especially if you're connected with the people in your church. So just be yourself. People love you in your church. I hope that's the reason for a church existing, is so that we can live in community and support each other. So don't be afraid to be yourself whenever you're in front of your church. There they were, the 5 things that I wish I knew before I became a worship leader. If you haven't left your comment down below yet, let me know. What do you wish you knew before you became a worship leader? I think that we can all learn from each other. And if you want to continue improving your worship leading, I put together a free audio training called 5 Tips to Instantly Improve Your Worship Leading. These are 5 simple things that if you just make the commitment to do them, they aren't hard to do. They will instantly improve your worship leading. So check out that free audio training. There's a link in the description below. Other than that, thanks so much for joining me today. Until I see you in the next video, keep leading worship well.